So, since September, I've been immersed in reading mostly my manuscripts that are yet to be published. But I've also been reading through this book by Eben Alexander and Karen Newell. It's called Living in a Mindful Universe. So, it's an account of Eben is actually a neurosurgeon, so he's accounting or is recollecting his journey and understanding of consciousness. So Alexander and Newell are using words to describe the ineffable. So not everyone would sign up to every detail, but their basic sense of the transcendent is essential as a motivating perspective to give us the necessary level of sustained conviction to put aside our differences and maybe undertake the challenging task of building a better world. I'm also going to profile the culture of contest by a book of the same title by Michael Kalbach. And then finally, I'm also going to look into some of the insights that I've gleaned from the book by Daniel Pick called Brainwashed, the main title. The subtitle is A New History of Thought Control. So let's start from the top. It's true that Alexander and Newell have used their website to share valuable ways to help us raise our level of consciousness. Is that enough though? Just like I have been doing since I started publishing in blogs and when I was running actively my website, and now hopefully publishing my works. Now, this is a truly important issue, and I feel it is one we may need to explore together at some length. I sense that this first attempt may already be too long. Now, as an introvert, part of me would like to believe I can just step back from the world and pursue my spiritual journey quietly, interacting with just a few like-minded souls. As I noted before somewhere, when I was working with a therapist, he jokingly shared his perception that on my grave would be carved the words, "He died with his options open." You see, so reluctant was I that at that point really, I never wanted to commit to any cause or join in any risk. I just wanted to leave. And life had really weathered me and beaten me to a pulp. There was no hope left in me. I was never that bright and brilliant and optimistic dreamer. It seems something very vital had been taken away from me. I still do not participate much in public processes. Like, for example, the political and economic system is in my view, very broken. I have explored this at some length in various times on my blogs. And today I'm just going to dive into culture of contest. Now, our habitual acceptance of competition and profit as natural blinds us to the problematic nature of our culture. Our culture of contest, to borrow Michael Kalbach's evocative phrase, is a broken model that, one, prevents the truth being discovered and justice reliably being achieved in courtrooms where the whole point is most, Western model countries is for two opposing teams to wrangle until wins. I think you saw that with the last election, the last 2022 Kenyan election. Big sham, as has always been since we knew elections. And if you are as skeptical like me, you will realize at some point that most elections are very much arranged. Fairness and transparency and integrity of electoral processes seems very far-fetched. And if you know how politics works, you realize that much of what we see is just the end of the outcome, the end of the stake. The background, which is very noisy and very actively ongoing, with a lot of negotiations, make you really so withdrawn from it. You start to feel like, can I make a change with my vote? how important is that one vote that I have? How important is it if and when it cannot be secured? Will it lose its value or voice? And then number two, this broken model also thwarts equity as well as increasing inequality in the economic sphere, where the price of increasing wealth goes to the most effective competitor rather than the most worthy one. You've seen it, and you're seeing it happening, and like most people are now like, I told you so. The president, William Ruto, presented himself as the savior for the hustlers, which was a big narrative, a very big facade. But now, for those people who believed him and thought that he was the savior, the skin is there now. He's born deep into the idea of amassing wealth and power to his center. The state capture that they were talking about as an outfit, as a Kenya Kwanza outfit, is actually beginning to come to form. And we're realizing what actually is wrong with our entire country since independence. We're realizing and questioning if we really do have a country in the first instance. Those guys are not interested about making better this country. They're not interested about the future of our children. They're not interested about functional and working systems that are deliberate and efficient and less wasteful. They don't care about that. And it's very apparent, very true and real when you look at, even for the simple and basic structure such as a cabinet, the cabinet that he has. They say sometimes you look at your friends and you might wonder what's wrong with you or what's really good with you, what makes you who you are, what surrounds you. And then number three, this same model also obstructs wise decision making in the political sphere, because the main point is to defeat one's opponent in elections and remain in power for as long as possible. You've seen what is happening. Every time we raise objective and pertinent issues about our country, about the economic hardships, about corruption, about restructuring government, about inflation, about literally everything that is objective, that is supposed to make this country better, you know what they do? They shift the blame, they shift the goalpost. Nobody looks inward. No, they don't. Because part of the main and key objective was already met during the last election. Beating the opponent. And this is a very key dilemma, because even if Raila were to win the elections last year, we would still face this very problem. The only difference is to what degree. Now, to use present-day party politics and the economic model as the two most relevant examples, we see, first of all, that a competitive model does not do a lot to widen the moral imaginations of its participants in the political sphere. Karlberg presents the weakness of this system clearly, and I will quote: "Parties may aim to realize a program of ideal political principles, but unless their activities are based on systematic strategies for achieving electoral success, they will be doomed to insignificance. Accordingly, parties become transformed above all else into means for fighting and winning elections." That's the first part. Second part, he says that once political leadership and control is determined through these adversarial contests, processes of public decision making are also structured in an adversarial manner. You saw how hotly contested the last 4 elections of this country has been. And if we stretch it further, we can go all the way to 2007. Karlberg also says that Western liberal apologists defend this competitive system of electioneering, debate, lobbying, and so forth as the rational alternative to political violence and war. Based on this common sense premise, we structure our political systems as nonviolent contests. even though most people recognize that these contests tend to favor more powerful social groups. This premise embodies a false choice that arises when the concept of democracy is conflated with the concept of partisanship. We lose sight of a third alternative, non-partisan democracy that might be more desirable. End of quote. Now, recent events illustrate how competitive divides corrode relationships even within the same political party. Now we have seen the breakaway of Mount Kenya bloc. They're starting to realize, might we have been duped into this program, into this idea of a Kenya united? In fact, a lot of them are actually regretting. It's just that Kenyans hardly ever take responsibility. We are not a nation that takes responsibility. That's why somebody would rather die in power. Somebody would rather kill in the relationship, kill the partner, than take part of responsibility. Now, in terms of economics, Karlberg argues that the same deficiencies appear in a different guise. And in fact, we ignore the fundamental principle of moral restraint on markets cited by one of the founding fathers of economic thinking, Adam Smith. Adam Smith, and I quote, writes that since Western liberal societies have, this is Karlberg's argument, that since Western liberal societies have largely neglected Smith's call for moral self-regulation, very important, I'll come to it, yet accepted Smith's warning about state regulation, they have been left with a culture of virtually unrestrained market competition. Indeed, competition has become the preeminent value of a deeply materialistic age. And in the absence of external and internal market regulation, it's the culture of competition or the culture of contest that has led to widespread social conflict and ecologically degraded society. Now let's crunch it up a little bit. Moral self-regulation is very important. Otherwise, human beings are generally insufferable. We want to amass, we want to be powerful, we want everything to ourselves. So without that conscious thought and rethinking that, could I share this with a neighbor? Could I make a better society? Matter of fact, I don't usually advocate for this, but could I be a benevolent thief? Because the truth is, most people get to power to protect either the wealth they have amassed or to get more. So the problem is, how greedy am I that I cannot even extend a little bit of courtesy of wealth to other people? Because when I do that, chances are, in my view and opinion, chances are that the society will be more functional. I might be able to expand my market sphere, and I might be able to generate more profits and protect and safeguard the continuity of my businesses or my empire. I don't know whether people think like that, or they believe that if I amass everything to myself, then fuck whoever, you know. But it's very important what Karlberg says, that while we understand that the government needs to be checked, we don't see that we should also be self-regulated at personal level. What makes a government is not administration, is not merely structures. Of course, those are important, or institutions. But what makes government are people. People with desires, people with vision, people with all kinds of mannerisms and worldviews and constructs. And so we end up in a place where the society is deeply materialistic, that any outcome is usually tied to the materials that we have, but not merely how to safeguard, how to generate that material sustainably. Now, Kalbach goes on to describe these as the causes of extreme economic inequality, driven by the capitalist attempt to extract the maximum surplus value from labor force that is the primary source of their wealth. Number two, rivalries between nations. You've seen Uganda doing the pull-out. Tanzania was already, during Magufuli, Tanzania was already making their own path. Soon, we will be an island. Our strong currency is fast depreciating. Our moral fabric is questionable. We have all these skyscrapers, but there is very little primary foundation for them. And then number three, a relative absence of both external state regulation and internal moral regulation. Absence. It's not like it's not there. It's not like Kenyans are the worst people to walk the face of the planet. No. But we have, what this creates, in my opinion, is we have unprecedented conflict between our own people and most other people in the ecosystem, for example, in the international system. And that we are seeing that happening with diplomacy. We are seeing that with Saudi Arabia in regards to labor. Yeah? We're seeing that happening with the same Saudi Arabia during the G2G oil agreement and trade agreement. We're seeing that with China when it happened during, the China Square issue. We're seeing that with South Africa during the passport debacle. We see that with the UK. I look at like Kipia and those reserves for training the military. So it is interesting to note that a more recent read that I was having, which I mentioned earlier, about a new history of thought control, in this book, it picks up an idea of Hannah Arendt. And if you look at it, I think what he quotes, by politics, she meant a process whereby a people in their plurality come together to engage with each peaceably, to look at real problems, debating, trying to determine collectively what is needed to consider matters in a properly inclusive and deliberative fashion. Daniel Pick says that, and I quote, a society needs to be engaged in a common conversation across all the difference. That is what makes a society. A society needs not to have voted Kenya Kwanza or Azimio. It needed not. It needed to vote the society's interest, because that is what sustains every other difference that comes in between. We want all our children to go to better school. We want to have a better curriculum. We want the rot and decay in Ministry of Health to be expunged out. We want the bloated budget to be reduced so that the weight and the burden on the taxpayer is reduced. We want a reimagination of our country, because it's hard to be a dreamer now in this country. Soon, most of us are going to forfeit their dreams because you do not know where to take them. You're talented, very gifted, educated, but you do not know where to take your dreams. It's becoming laughable to have a dream in this country, to have a talent, to have a skill. And so, Pick summarizes her position by saying, in short, we need to struggle for the creation, or in some instances, the restoration of conditions that enable us better to engage with each other as a people, with requisite information, and to think in company with others about our future. Very important. To compare notes on harms and own remedies with less role for money and the banishment of corrupt corporate lobbyists in that process. Kenya Kwanza was talking about state capture. State capture was not just about the soundbite in Kenya Kwanza campaigns. It was actually even in their rival team. And because deep state was also another huge soundbite being blown all over, and we wonder what makes this deep state? What comprises of a deep state? Well, I told you earlier that a country may seem to be run by a government or an administration or a structure or an institution, but merely that's just the face. What we have are people. What we have are people with very, very, very important assets and resources to call shots. And these people know each other. And these people compromise a great deal, even when on the face value in public, they don't see each other eye to eye. That's the corporate lobbyism that creates the process of state capture. Even right now, we feel that there is a huge heated debate between Azimio and Kenya Kwanza, a year and some months after elections. But that's not what is going on. The society of Kenya, the nation of Kenya, is not at the center of it. No. The center of it are the interests by these powerful people. They have not sat down to imagine a Kenya that is inclusive, where the remedies and the harms are spoken about insofar as it can sustain the center of our nation. Now, I will try to explore what it might mean to draw on the spirituality of our nation. One time, I think it must have been Mordecai who told me that I should be grateful that I am alive, because most people in our country are dead. They walk, but they have a dead soul. And it has, over the years, since he said this in 2019, I suppose, I've constantly been reflecting about the soul of our nation. Do we have a soul left anymore? And I think that an exploration of the nature of social action must necessarily place it in the broad context of our own spirituality. That whatever we believe to be global civilization is both materially and spiritually prosperous, and it represents the next stage of a long process of social evolution. And I think this provides the concept of history that endows every instance of social action with a particular purpose. What is our purpose? When we go for elections, when we run tags on Twitter, when we make noise in social and digital platforms, what is our purpose? Do we want to foster true prosperity, or do we want to diversify our inhibitions? A concept of vital relevance then, I think, is the imperative to achieve a dynamic coherence between the practical and the spiritual requirements of life. And that is why it is very important to separate the facade that you see in churches. There has been a stranglehold of churches in Kenya, of religious outfits. But the politicians, and they know how. They know that this is very important in terms of the ideal control of the masses. In Kenya and in many African countries, if you would present yourself as a God-fearing person, then we might forgive you for every other thing, for every other folly, for every other corrupt stain on your fabric, in your soul. So much so that when we need to actually ultimately declare objectivism in our issues, then we resort to church, which is very important in terms of modeling and molding our moral outlook of things. But we see that over and over, it is being used as an excuse, as a path to not be accountable, as a bridge to hypnotize the masses. So that when a government is failing, now we resort to saying that God punishes its people through the leaders they choose. What kind of fuckery is that? So we go into an election and make the biggest blunders of our histories, and then not even a month, 3 weeks after that, or say the first quarter after inauguration, we start to lament how the government is really fucked up, how we're sinking deeper, but not taking responsibility about it. And when the next electioneering period comes, we make the same mistakes. Now, I think that when the material and spiritual dimensions of the life of a community are kept in mind and due attention is given to both scientific and spiritual knowledge, the tendency to reduce development to mere consumption of goods and services and the naive use of technological packages is avoided. Scientific knowledge, to take but one simple example, helps the members of a community to analyze the physical and social implications of a given proposal. Say its environmental impact, or the health of the economy, or the curriculum, or NHIF. And spiritual insights gives rise to a moral imperative that upholds social harmony and that ensures that our progress serves the common good. Together, these two sources, I think, these two sources of knowledge tap roots of motivation in individuals and communities. And this is so essential in breaking free from the shelter of passivity and enable us to recover and uncover the traps of consumerism. It's very common sense in this country that if you can consume, if you can gladly pay your rent, if you can go to a mall and buy a shopping, if you can take your kids to good school, then you are safe. It creates that passive interest. Therefore, fuck politics. Therefore, fuck religion. I don't care about education. My kids are going to a better school. I think it is from the fusion of both material and spiritual powers that the necessary understanding and motivation are derived. And I will share another book which I was reading, I think in September or August. Matthew Ricard's awareness, as expressed in his book Altruism, of the need to link the local through the national to the global, which is what I might call a social action. He says, and I quote, "No matter how essential a process of learning at the local level will remain limited in its effectiveness if it is not connected to the human process concerned with the material and spiritual prosperity of humanity as a whole. Structures are required then at all levels, from the local to the international, to facilitate learning about development." End of quote. Now, the reason why I also needed to tie this to a book by Ray Anderson called The Cultural Creatives is to try and convey some of the ways to explain or discuss our sense of nature of the cultural exchange we are all experiencing, but from the point of view of like a creative. Ray and Anderson says that this group of cultural creatives constitute 25% of population and about 50 million people. And feel we are in a period of transition. They call this the between. I'm very sure you've seen the implosion of creatives. I think since the pandemic, we've seen one of the biggest expansion, I would say, of the creative economy. We've seen the rise of TikTok, we've seen the rise of Snapchat, we've seen the rise of podcasting and publishing and digital creation happening so fast, and the changes have been very immense. Now, I think that the between is the time between worldviews, values and ways of life, and time between stories, and it is the transition period that John Naisbitt concluded, and I quote, is a great and yeasty time filled with opportunity. But it is also, as he added, only on two critical conditions. If we can make uncertainty our friend, and if we can only get a clear sense, a clear conception, a clear vision of the road ahead. Very important. Uncertainty and clarity. But which is very ironical, because clarity and uncertainty, they don't go together. Often when my students ask me how I have survived, especially the desperate times of my life post-cancer, it's been really difficult sometimes, because one thing I realized, and one thing that I realize is a huge skill for young people or for the generation to come, is their ability to deal with uncertainty. We live in a world where there are no absolutes anymore, none whatsoever. What we imagine, somebody will twist it and they will give a very rational thought and a backup explanation to it. And so life as we know it is rapidly changing, and it's not static anymore, it's very dynamic. Ray and Anderson are cautious and see this period as a dangerous tipping point. They describe the position of cultural creatives as seeing an antique system that is noisily, chaotically shaking itself to pieces. This is not all negative, in my opinion, because they say, and I quote again, this era is at least as much about cultural innovation as it is about decline and decay of established forms. We've seen the crisis happening in government, we've seen the crisis in marriages and institutions, even education. People are now opting to study in YouTube and have resources in online academies than go to a traditional schooling system. Our thought process is rapidly going through changes and is constantly being critiqued. Ray and Anderson, in terms of interdependence, quote Mary Ford in this way: you have to have a definition of self that's bigger than society's definition, that's grounded in how connected we all are to each other. I've always been insisting that as much as my story is very personal, the cancer story, my dreams and hopes of becoming a better educator, all these things are very personal to me as I pursue them. But what has sustained me beyond the despair, beyond not achieving most of them and still falling short of their grace, is to try and connect that to the larger definition of the society. There's a way society defines Omondi Chuka. He's a cancer survivor, he's an educator, he's a researcher, he's an artist. But I need to define myself beyond that, because otherwise I will be its slave. And I will be in some way subservient to it. And this needs to lead to coordinated action, something which I feel plugs a hole in Alexander and Newell's nonetheless impressive boat. The skilled marketing they do in their sacred acoustic site does not go far enough. And therefore, The how of mobilizing effective coordinated action is, of course, easier said than done, and we'll be looking at, hopefully, in a more detailed post next time. Umundi Chuka, and this is Proof of Life.